Good evening, guys. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We are about to start our WorldTeach webinar focused on our teaching placements, specifically in the Pacific Islands of American Samoa, Marshall Islands, and Micronesia. So thank you so much for joining us. We have over 100 people listening in, which is very exciting, from a few different countries. We've got some new applicants on the line. We have people that have just been accepted into the program, and others that are just kind of interested about learning more about the Pacific and WorldTeach. So you can kind of disregard that chat message that went out saying that we're going to talk about Thailand. That was my mistake. My apologies. So my name is Brooke Wallace. I'm the Director of Recruitment and Communications at WorldTeach. I was a year-long volunteer with WorldTeach in Colombia in 2013. Also on the line, we have Caitlin Ivester. We work together. She's our admissions coordinator and a WorldTeach Costa Rica summer alum from 2008. And then most importantly, we have 4 panelists joining us that were volunteers and also a field director in the Pacific over the last couple years. So they will be giving us the most insight tonight. So thanks you guys so much for joining us, and let's get started. Okay, so we're going to go over our agenda. We'll spend a few minutes meeting our great panelists, learning about their backgrounds, why they chose WorldTeach and the specific countries that they taught in. Then we'll get into the specifics of our programs in the Pacific, our partnership, the funding that we receive from them, why there's a need for our volunteers, support that's provided, orientation training, etc. From there, we're going to focus on each country by speaking with our panelists. What and where we teach, what subjects, what schools we're teaching in, and where we're living in each country. What sort of resources you'll find in the classroom. We'll be discussing cultural challenges that our volunteers have faced in the schools, but also the communities in general, and specific items that are important for each country. For example, the Praxis exam in American Samoa, and the option of TEFL certification in the Marshall Islands. Then we will be discussing kind of living in the Pacific in general, so how placements are made, when you will find that information out, because that's everyone's number one question, what the housing situations are like, who will you be living with, what the monthly stipend is in each country, and how volunteers budget for that. Then we'll be discussing activities that people are involved in, health and safety, cultural challenges, as it says there, all of those things while hearing personal experiences from the volunteers that are on the line. Then Caitlin will be quickly walking us through volunteer qualifications in the application process. And then, of course, if anyone has any remaining questions, we'll be able to speak with our panelists further. So let's do this. On the right side in your little function box through the GoToWebinar, you'll see that you can type in questions. So we do have staff on the line. If you guys want to type in any of those questions, they'll be able to answer them for you. And then also we might just be addressing it together as a group. So let's do this. Okay, so starting, as I mentioned, we have 4 panelists on the line. So Melinda, would you start by introducing yourself and tell us how you first came about WorldTeach and why you decided to apply specifically to teach in American Samoa?
Yeah, hi, my name is Melinda Ramirez. You'll see from kind of the short bio that I'm from New York City, from the Bronx. I currently live in Texas. What prompted me to look into WorldTeach was my mentor. I had a college mentor, and she knew of the program, and she was actually doing some study work in Fiji. And so I've always wanted to go abroad and kind of volunteer, and it was WorldTeach kind of gave me the opportunity to not only teach English as like the traditional, where I'm teaching English as the language, but I'm teaching English as a language arts, not a foreign language, and I had the opportunity to teach other subjects, and so that's kind of what prompted me to get to apply to WorldTeach. And I chose Samoa because I was ready to go abroad, but not ready to be by myself, and I knew that my mentor was in Fiji, so it seemed like the best option for me, and I have no regrets.
Kind of just an island jump across the water, maybe, over to Fiji?
Yeah. And I loved islands and wanted to be in an island since as long as I could remember, and so it was perfect.
Great, that's awesome. Thank you so much. So also on the line we have Ben Madry representing our Marshall Islands program. Ben, would you like to quickly introduce yourself and tell us how you chose WorldTeach and specifically the Marshalls?
Yeah, so my name is Ben Madry, and I'm originally from Colorado. And during my senior year at Colorado State University, I took a Indigenous Women Children Studies class, and we learned a little bit about the Marshall Islands and just this whole culture that I had never even heard about, and just seemed super interesting to me. So I kind of thought to myself, like, man, that'd be a cool spot to go sometime, but I don't know how I'd ever get there. Like, it's a super small place and very remote. And then, throughout my senior year, second semester of college, I kind of thought about what was next and what I wanted to do. And I had a friend who actually did WorldTeach the year before me in Colombia and kind of told me it was a cool thing to do and told me a little bit about WorldTeach. So I looked into it and thought it was a great opportunity to not only be able to travel abroad, learn about a new culture, but then also the culture that I wanted to get interested in, which was the Marshall Islands. So
Awesome. Fantastic. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Ben. We're going to go on to the remaining two panelists. So Matt, joining us all the way from Australia. He was our field director in Micronesia, but of course before that started as a volunteer in the Marshall Islands as well. So Matt, thank you for joining us. We would love to hear how you first decided to go to the Marshalls and then Micronesia, and how you heard of WorldTeach all the way over on the other side of the world.
I finished my science degree and also my TESOL qualification at the same time, and was searching for a way to get overseas in the cheapest way possible. And so after searching for many, many days on the internet, I found WorldTeach, and they had funded programs. So I applied to Micronesia originally and got denied, and then I was accepted into the Marshall Islands program. And it was a fantastic experience. After that, I travelled to South America for a year, and then when the field director position came up in Chuuk, having kind of a background in the Pacific Islands, I knew it was going to be a big challenge, but that it was going to be worth it.
Awesome. And was it worth it?
Yeah, it was quite an experience. Quite an experience.
Good answer. Okay, last but not least, we have Mike Diaz, also representing Micronesia. Matt and Mike were on different atolls or different chains of islands. So Mike, welcome, and tell us how you came across WorldTeach and why you decided to apply and teach in Micronesia.
Yeah, so I had a little bit of a different route. The spring of my junior year of college, decided that I wanted to look into volunteering or working internationally and getting some experience in that. I looked at a lot of different organizations, considered the Peace Corps, really spent a solid 6 months looking at programs, and when I finally came across WorldTeach and specifically the Pacific Island programs, I was really excited about the opportunity to teach, but teach math or teach language arts as opposed to just teaching English as a language. And was really excited about the opportunity that it provided by being a funded program. And I thought that said a lot about the type of work you're doing, that someone is willing to, or like the Department of Education is willing to put up the money to bring you in and support you while you're there. It shows that there's really a need and that people are excited about you being there. So yeah, that was why I chose WorldTeach in Micronesia, and it was a blast. It was really more amazing than I ever could have expected.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, I'm glad that all of you guys and myself personally found WorldTeach, so here we are. All right, let's keep going. So I'm going to speak kind of specifically to our work in the Pacific and our relationship, our partnership that has gotten us there. So we've actually been in the Pacific for about 13 years now, starting with our program in the Marshalls in 2002, followed by Micronesia in 2005 and American Samoa in 2008. So we partner directly with the Ministry or Department of Education in each of those island nations. They're the ones that invite us there, and they're the ones that pay for us. So, it's kind of their doing to realize that we have these educational needs. We're the ones that have self-identified that, and we know that we could use your help. So again, with that invitation, we are working pretty successfully there, and we definitely wouldn't be in country without those invitations. So of course that funding is pretty fantastic, and as all of our panelists mentioned, I think it speaks to their interests in having us there and supporting our volunteers. So you'll see this list here of why there is a need specifically for our volunteers in the Pacific, and I think it speaks for itself. So in these island nations, English is one of the official languages, and it's also technically the required language of instruction, meaning it should be taught in the classes, or at least to the majority of them, depending on the country. But despite that, the teachers and the students have fairly low English achievement levels. So we're brought in oftentimes to teach English for that purpose, but then also, as the panelists mentioned, we're teaching other subjects as well, math and science, and even geography and algebra and things that are kind of way above my head. But the reality is that these schools don't have teachers qualified to teach those items, and even though we are volunteer teachers and perhaps haven't studied those specific fields, the reality is that we are going to be teaching it better, or not better. We might have more success in teaching these items because the books, as I said here, the books here are published in English, and we are willing to go to these very remote places where sometimes they can't get a teacher to move to permanently. In American Samoa, it's another example. Some of the local teachers haven't passed their certification exams to teach English, so they're not allowed to be funded, to be paid. So that's why we go to teach English there. So many different reasons that all kind of vary by country that we're going to get into a bit further as we go on. So again, if anyone has questions, definitely please type them in on the side there. So now we're going to talk about funding and the volunteer support that we get and that we give to the volunteers. So through our partnerships with the Ministry and Departments of Education that we just mentioned, we receive all of the funding required to support the volunteer in country. So this is your international airfare from a designated U.S. departure city, which is usually Los Angeles. So that means that for all the people listening right now from other countries, we give you the value of the flight from Los Angeles to the Pacific, whichever country that is, so that you can then book your own flights. So it's okay if you're coming from another country, we would give you the value of that money to book your own flights. And volunteers within the United States have to get themselves to that departure city, again, which is usually Los Angeles, and then the rest of the international flights, round trip, is funded. So that's pretty fantastic. The funding also covers housing, monthly stipend, visa, health and emergency evacuation insurance, orientation and training conferences, field staff, in-country transportation, and all of that stuff. You'll see here at the bottom that a $2,000 deposit is required for the funded programs, which can be paid in installments before departure, and it's returned upon completion of the program. And so this is, of course, we're promising X number of teachers to these schools, so we need to be able to fulfill those promises. So this ensures that the volunteers actually get to the country, because we're the ones booking their flights, and that they fill their teaching obligations for the year. Otherwise, the class would be empty, and that is definitely not a good thing. So let's go forward. Just a very quick note on orientation training, because I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, I have never taught before. I did not study education. How are these people going to think that I know what to do in the classroom? So the majority of our volunteers are as such, that we're not trained teachers, and we recognize that. So for that reason, our orientation training is very important. It's about 3 to 4 weeks when you first get to the country, and you'll have teacher training sessions every day. You'll complete an actual teaching practicum. You'll get curriculum resources that we have designed specifically for the country and the schools where we work, that you can use if you want to. You don't have to use those resources, but they're definitely helpful. And then you're also in touch with a teacher quality coordinator here in my office in Boston that is in touch with you monthly to help you with lesson plans and assessments, provide additional materials, answer questions, that sort of thing. And then also during orientation, you'll be doing language and cultural immersion. So obviously they do speak English in these countries, but there are local dialects as well, local languages as well, and you want to be part of their community. So of course you want to learn some of those languages. So those sorts of things will be addressed during orientation. And then very, very importantly, especially in the Pacific, we'll be talking about safety, health, boat and water training, which is huge. So those things will include a trip to the local U.S. Embassy in terms of safety briefing. You'll also be speaking with local health professionals, and then the boat and water training. In some places it's done through, like, for example, I believe in Micronesia, no, in the Marshall Islands. That's where we work with the Royal Australian Navy to actually lead that instruction. So this is very, very serious, that we cannot ignore the fact that we're living in an area that has a lot of difficult living situations. I think the climate and the land kind of dictate that, so we need to live with it and not against it. We need to learn how to handle ourselves there and how to stay healthy. Also during orientation, we'll be reviewing an emergency action plan and protocol and how all of that communication happens between the field director and the volunteers. So that's just kind of an introduction to orientation. So let's get right into it. We're going to start with American Samoa, where we are very lucky to have Melinda on the line telling us about it. So on each of these pages, you'll see some kind of basic details about the program. You can find most of that information on our website, so no need to talk about that. We'll just get to some more interesting details with Melinda. So Melinda, I have a couple questions for you. So I guess kind of just to start, could you tell us a bit about your housing, who you lived with, what amenities you had or didn't have, and how close you were to your school?
Okay. I lived in a house. It was kind of divided up into 2 or 3 different parts. The bottom left-hand corner was a family that was hosting us, and then the upstairs part was for me and my roommate, and then we had another kind of separated area that was for the other teacher that was at my school. The bottom right-hand corner had a couple teachers from another school nearby. So to give you a picture, it kind of looked like a tree house, to be honest, but like a really cool one. Mm-hmm. We had internet, we had hot water, running hot water, we had internet, and let's see, the bus to go to school stopped right in front of the house, so you would just kind of walk down the pathway and grab the bus, and it would be $1 mm-hmm. to get to the roadway that would lead you to campus. So it was really, really easy to get to campus, and I feel like we were spoiled in the sense that we had hot water and internet.
Yeah, I think so, because as we'll see through the rest of this webinar, we were definitely dealing with some limited resources and amenities and utilities in a lot of these places. That's awesome, Melinda. Okay, tell us what you did during, your average weekend, or kind of how you got involved in, the community outside of school, and whether you found that kind of easy to integrate into that community or not.
Yeah, it was super easy to get involved in the community. They're so receptive and so friendly and so outgoing that I honestly don't know how it would be difficult for anyone. Even me, I'm typically very shy and reserved, and they go out of their way to just welcome you. So if I was waiting for the bus and the bus was taking a while and a family just drove by, they would pick me up and take me home. I was involved in there was a island-wide competition for the students. So it's called the Speech Festival, so I was working with the students on that, I helped with the yearbook, after-school activities. There were a couple things, and I helped tutor some students for the ACTs in all subjects, as well as a couple of other things, other programs that were available at the school.
Cool. So since you mentioned ACT, I'm actually going to ask you about the Praxis exam, which most people listening have probably never heard of before. I hadn't. So the Praxis exam is also a national exam that all of our volunteers going to American Samoa are required to take because it proves their English proficiency, which is needed in order to receive the funding. So it's local American Samoan teachers have to take it, and therefore our volunteers have to take it as well. The problem, however, is that a lot of the local American Samoan teachers aren't actually passing it, which is why we're going there to teach English. So I wanted to ask, Melinda, I believe you had to take that, correct?
I did, yes.
And so it tests reading, writing, and math, and would you say it was relatively, like, how did you deal with that? Was it okay? Did you prepare a lot, or was it much more simple?
Yeah, so we prepared with our field director during the beginning orientation and then closer to the date. And I don't necessarily love testing, and I feel like no one actually does, but I was very nervous about it, and it ended up being a little bit easier than I thought it was, and the rest of the group said that they felt that they were very comfortable and confident, and I know when we received our scores back, we all had passed, and I think that largely has to do with us, being here and this, being able to speak English natively or have a native level language ability to speak English, so it was a little bit easier on our end.
Yeah, perfect, yeah. So it's actually changed slightly. Now the volunteers actually have to complete the Praxis exam here in the States or wherever they are internationally, if it is indeed offered, before going to American Samoa. But that's something that we can get into later. So I'll send out more details on that Praxis exam via email. But so thank you, Melinda, for kind of just giving us a little quick introduction to American Samoa, and we'll have some more questions for you in just a little bit. For right now, we're going to get into the Marshalls. So, Marshall Islands, we've got Ben on the line joining us. So here in the Marshall Islands, we have some of our actually most remote placements, our most rural placements, and then of course we do have some urban islands as well with Majuro and Ibai. Ben, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, right? Ibai?
Yes, Ibai.
Okay, beautiful. So, before I have some questions for you, I just kind of want to quickly say that some of our placements here in the Marshalls actually will qualify for TEFL certification, which means that that's teaching English as a foreign language. That certification allows you guys to get full-time teaching jobs abroad, but it is dependent on, it has to be an elementary school position, and it's only offered in certain places. So I just want to kind of throw that out there quickly, if that's something that people were looking for that certification. But moving on to Ben. So you were indeed teaching English in the Marshalls, so I wanted to ask you what the level of English was amongst your students, but also the teachers in your school.
Yeah, so I was on an outer island, and I think the level is a little bit lower than on Majuro, or a more urban place, because I guess you're more exposed to English in those places. But the teachers, they were all conversational at least, and it was, if I needed help with something or something like that, I could talk to them in English. And then as far as the students, my 8th grade class was also pretty conversational, but then obviously as the grades get lower, it was a little bit harder to have any English in the classroom. For example, my 1st and 2nd grade class, even having them follow directions hey, sit down and things like that, to say that in English was completely over their head and they had no idea what you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So What sort of resources did you find in this classroom, and if there perhaps weren't any, then what did you do to create fun and dynamic lesson plans?
So before I came, I talked to the volunteer who was there beforehand, and he gave me some good advice as to bring as many materials as I could. So I actually packed a whole separate suitcase of just as much school supplies as I could. So thankfully, my mom is a middle school teacher, so she had stacks and stacks of crayons and paper and notebooks and pencils and stuff like that. So I packed a whole suitcase with me just filled with those supplies because I knew that there weren't many available once I got there. So those lasted about half the year, and then after that it was time to become a little bit more creative. But using the island as a resource was definitely very beneficial, I think, for myself and the students. So one, you get out of the classroom. It's kind of a different learning environment for the students. So things like taking them on walks and then having them like look at, making like compare and contrast essays for like my 7th and 8th grade students of the 2 different churches that were on there. So like visually going to see something, or taking like big leaves that have fallen from the trees and like using those as paper to like make some type of project or something like that too.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Good for you. Now, obviously, internet and phone communication, I believe, is fairly limited. As you mentioned, you're on an outer island. I'm not sure if what your priorities were, but if you were looking to communicate with people back home or other volunteers, how would you manage that?
So we had weekly check-ins with our field director. So every Wednesday I would get on the radio and speak with my field director, and then through that I could speak to him and then also the other volunteers that were on the check-in for that day. As far as contact outside of the Marshall Islands, like with family back home, it was just through letters and packages. So it takes a long time to get a letter from the States all the way to a small outer island in the Marshall Islands. So the letters came maybe once a month, if that, maybe once every 2 months. So it was definitely something hard to get used to not be able to talk with people on a regular basis. I was fortunate enough that my school did have a computer and internet, but I mean it wasn't very reliable at all. It would take like maybe an hour for the computer to load, another hour for the internet to load up and stuff like that. So maybe for like the first month I used that and was able to like send one email to some family back home, but after that it just became more frustrating to sit there and wait for that. So as far as contact with family members and stuff, it was maybe on like a bi-monthly basis through letters.
So I guess on that note, actually, one thing that a lot of our volunteers struggle with is, in the Marshall Islands specifically, is learning kind of how to be alone, and that those feelings of separation and perhaps even isolation, and probably having a lot of free time on your hands. So how did you have any experience with that? Did you feel like, you kind of had to learn to be on your own, or to be so far away from most of the world, really?
It was definitely a bit challenging at first. You're with people that you've never met before in your whole life, and they're speaking a foreign language that you don't really understand yet. You're trying to teach, and I didn't have any teaching experience prior to that. So the first 2 months were definitely pretty challenging and really tested my ability to, I guess, be alone. But then once you kind of think about it, you're not alone because you're with a whole island of, I had 200 people living on my island, and like every single one of those people care so much about you being there and are so nice and so friendly and so helpful, so that once you kind of realize that wow, like these people are going out of the way and like going the extra mile just to make sure that you have everything that you need, really opened my eyes to the culture and the people that were there. So just knowing that and like becoming friends with them and talking to them on a daily basis definitely helped with that. So
that's awesome.
Could I add something to that, Brooke?
Yes, absolutely, Matt. Please. You were also in the Marshall Islands as a volunteer, so go for it.
Yeah, so I was on an outer island called Arno. It's only about 3 hours boat ride from the capital, Majuro. But I just wanted to add that there will be days that you feel like you're in the worst place in the world, that you'll be homesick, and the teaching day's gone badly. The best thing you can do is go out into the community, hang out with the kids, spend time with your family, and you'll never regret it.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you said that, because yes, teaching is extremely difficult, whether it's in your home country or a foreign country. And when you don't have the support systems in place that you're used to, you need to look for a new one. You cannot expect to do it all on your own. So yes, that's what the community is there for, and we're so lucky that these communities literally are asking for us to be there, and they're welcoming you in. So Ben, I was going to ask you like how you integrated into that community, but I think you're all speaking for it just organically, that it just really happens and that they're extremely welcoming and supportive of you. So that's great.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
I'd also add the church is a good way to get involved too. Even if you're not a religious person, they have like a bunch of events that are always going on there, and it's a great way to get involved with like the youth that's there as well. And it's really fun to like put on like the different dance shows and the songs and stuff they do at church or religious holidays and stuff like that. So the church is a really good way to get involved in the community.
That's great, and I agree. I was in Colombia, which is a very Catholic community, and I am not Catholic nor religious, and it definitely does speak to everybody and invite everybody. So that's great. Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. We'll have some more questions for you in just a little bit. So now getting to Micronesia, where we place volunteers in these 3 atolls, which I mentioned are kind of like chains of islands. So we're in Chuuk, Koshrai, and Pohnpei. So I want to start with Mike, who was a volunteer in Pohnpei. So Mike, I would love to hear about your experience in Micronesia, and also kind of how it affected your career plans, because I know you had mentioned in your biography that you're going in to get a Master's of Public Health. So how it kind of changed your future in terms of your profession, and what skills you took away from that year.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was teaching in there were kind of like 3 areas of Pohnpei that people taught in. There was the main town called Colonia, and I was about a 45-minute to an hour taxi ride away from there. So I had the kind of benefit of having a rural experience and like living in a close-knit community and walking to school every day and knowing all my neighbors and having it be a very small feel, but then also being able to go to a little bit more developed of a capital where there were expats and could kind of relax a little bit, like more what I was used to.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that what skills I learned and how it impacted my career development and things like that is that it just made me adapt. It made me go into a place that I was obviously not very used to, and it made me make the best out of the situation. It made me, it really challenged me, and I think this is true of anywhere. It challenges you to, make the best of the situation and give whatever you can to the situation, and it really makes you figure out what you're passionate about and what you're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So I personally am interested in public health and in community health, and I decided to start a student club called Students for a Healthy Pohnpei. And it wasn't a huge undertaking or anything like that, but it was something I was excited about, and it was something that I shared with the students. And so it was just like a weekly meeting, and we would talk about health issues, and it was kind of engaging the students in talking about health and talking about different things they could do to be healthier, because obesity is a very big problem in Micronesia.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of the overall advice that I have from that is just, make your time in these communities your own. Like, bring something to the communities, and I guarantee you'll get something from the community as well. So for me personally, it was sharing my passion with public and community health, and I received so much from my students and from the different community members, and all of those things were really, really amazing experiences. And that was all in addition to teaching math 5 days a week to 3 classes. So it's you really can make it your own and adapt it to what you're interested in. So I learned a lot about how passionate I am about health because, you know, in that situation, that was what I was drawn to do, and you can really learn a lot about yourself through the experience.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that, and thanks for doing all that hard work. I'm sure you were busy. One more question for you, Mike. So obviously, Micronesia and all of these countries that we're discussing, they are U.S. territories of some sort, and we don't need to get into all of the politics behind that because I know the histories are extensive. But I wanted to get kind of a personal take on that. I don't know if you kind of would see or feel like how locals perceived you as being, you know, a mainland U.S. citizen or obviously a foreigner to their community, but a foreigner, yes, but maybe no. I'm not sure. But did you feel anything like how these territories would receive foreigners?
Yeah. So my perspective only comes from Pohnpei,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, but everyone there was incredibly enthusiastic and excited about America, American culture, Americans in general. They always wanted to talk about movies and music, and were super excited to have you there and a part of their community. They were, yeah, there was absolutely no stigma attached to you as a foreigner or as a American especially. I felt super welcome in all situations, and there were a lot of international people on Pohnpei. There was one of the volunteers was from India, a couple were from Canada, one was from Ireland, and one was from Saudi Arabia, and everyone I think felt very comfortable and welcome, and you know, there was no, like, yes, you were definitely an outsider. Yes, it was, you were different, but that almost made you someone that they were excited to share their culture with, and someone they were, you know, appreciative and yeah, like I said, just excited to share their culture with you and to learn about your culture.
Great, awesome. Yeah, it's definitely an exchange, that's for sure. I'd say much more our volunteers learning so much about these new cultures that we're in. You know, we go there as the teachers, but I think we end up leaving as the student because you're going to learn so much more than you can ever imagine. All right, fantastic, Mike. Thank you so much. So, Matt, I have a question for you as you were the field director in Chuuk in one of the atolls. So in a little bit, we'll be discussing safety in further detail, but I wanted to ask you specifically that obviously in some placements, and Mike Chuuk being one of them, some volunteers are not, or not some, excuse me, volunteers are not encouraged to go out after night, and that is kind of a rule that we have, not a rule, but that is a practice that most of our programs across the world follow. But I wanted to ask you, in your case, you oversaw all of those volunteers. How did people deal with this? How did they deal with all of the free time that they had at night? How did they, you know, maintain their social identities, and anything we could kind of grasp on that would be great.
At night time there's not much to do anyway, so a lot of volunteers after a certain amount of time, after about the first few months, they seem to adjust to that fact really well. And in terms of what they did with that time, making friends within the group and developing a relationship with host families was really important.
Mm-hmm.
The volunteers who had host families said that was one of the highlights of the entire year, and so just spending time with them was a big part of that. In Chuuk, there is a resort that you can, if you're really getting antsy about not going outside, there's a resort that is safe to spend time outside at night time, but it's about $30 a night, so it can be quite expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But mainly that, just forming relationships with host family and other volunteers was a big part of it. And lots of movies.
Awesome, fantastic. Okay, cool. So this is just a brief introduction to Micronesia. We're going to hear again from both of you guys shortly, so thank you for these details. Let's move forward so we stay on time. So here we are living in the Pacific. We're going to talk quickly about placements and stipends, life outside of the classroom. So if and when you are accepted into the program, you'll fill out what's called a volunteer profile form, where you list your preferences on what age students you're looking to teach, what sort of environment you want to live in, you know, if you prefer to be near other volunteers or if you want more of a remote experience. And so based off of your preferences and of course your experiences, your field director is going to place you accordingly where he or she thinks you'll be the most successful. So these details, these placements, will usually be decided and communicated to the volunteers about a month, maybe 3 to 4 weeks before departure. So it's all fairly last minute. That could even change. It could even be you could find out about it once you're in country. So the theme behind all of this is that you have to be very, very flexible. You have to be flexible to learn a new culture, to learn a new place, to become comfortable in a new school, in a new community, and oftentimes in somebody else's home. And this is just one more item that you have to be very flexible with. So housing placements, we've kind of just gotten an introduction to some of them so far. They obviously vary, so you could have family compounds, which is what Melinda told us about. You have different family members or different families living in different parts of like one property. Sometimes you'll have teacher apartments where a couple volunteers are living together. And then other times you'll be just the only volunteer living with your host family. All of this information is on our website to tell you kind of what the situation is in each country. American Samoa and Micronesia specifically, the volunteers are always placed in pairs or perhaps even 2 to 3 people in a housing situation, whether they're with a host family or not. Whereas in the Marshall Islands, the volunteers will be the only volunteer with their host family. Obviously, as we heard, internet access varies, etc. So monthly stipends. Actually, you know what? I have a question for everyone before we get into the money. It's one thing that kind of like explains what's really going on in terms of like amenities in this places. Of all 4 of you guys on the line, I assume all of you did your laundry by hand, correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I wasn't allowed to in the Marshall Islands, so the women in my host family did it for me, so I got off on that one.
Ah, well
Yeah, same here.
Okay, well, I'm very glad you guys said that. That will bring us to our next page, which is about cultural challenges and gender norms being one of them. And I'm sure all the ladies listening will really appreciate that conversation because I, for one, would have been not so happy with that, but that's what you have to be flexible with living in these communities. So that's what we're dealing with. You're not always going to have running water. You might not have a Western toilet. You might not. You might not have hot water, but then again, you are in the Pacific. So thank you guys for that bit of insight. So as you'll see this list here on the monthly stipend, it varies tremendously by country, and that's based on the cost of living in each country. And then even within that country, it could vary, again, based on location, what sort of expenses you'll have, and really also the ability to even spend money. So I wanted to ask Ben, you were in the Outer Islands. I believe you probably had a stipend of around $100 US. How did you spend that money?
So yeah, I had the $100, and then my host family got $150 every month.
Mm-hmm.
And I pretty much just gave my $100 stipend to my family. So there wasn't really much to buy except for like some deodorant and maybe like some toothpaste and something like that I needed every once in a while. But other than that, I just try to help my host family out as much as possible. There's times like we didn't have enough rice or didn't have any flour or something like that they didn't have any money for that. So they would just ask me for money, and I told them that was very okay for them to do. Because at first they wouldn't. They were very hesitant, and they're like, oh, we don't have any rice today. no, you should just ask me. I have like $100 that I don't know how to spend, so you can just have it. So I just pretty much gave it to them.
That's a great example, and it's a very generous example. I'm sure most of the volunteers probably didn't do that, but definitely, as you mentioned, the reality is you couldn't spend all of that money if you wanted to. Whereas I want to also hear from Mike and Melinda as to how you guys dealt with your stipends, which, as you can see, are more expensive, or excuse me, it's more valuable. So you have $400 in American Samoa and $300 in Micronesia. And also right below that, you'll see that it says that the volunteers in those countries actually have to pay monthly utilities, and that could vary tremendously by location. It's going to be essentially water and electric, and sometimes internet. And so, of course, that's one reason why the stipend is higher. Melinda, can you tell us how you budgeted in American Samoa?
Yeah, so I saved a little bit of my money, and then I used a little bit, so I kind of broke it up into threes, where I'd spend a portion of it making sure that I have the dollar to get to school and then the dollar to get back, and the occasional, like, eating out and the occasional just taxi home. And this is because I was in the main island, so there was a lot more resources. But I saved another portion of it for school supplies. I wanted to make sure that I had enough to do creative activities with my students. I taught 9th, 11th, and 12th graders. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to make sure that I had enough supplies for each grade and each class that I was teaching. Mm-hmm. And then I saved the rest, and with that savings, as well as the savings that I had brought from home, I traveled to New Zealand and to Samoa.
Very nice. That's a great point, that obviously a lot of times people do travel, and your stipend will not really help with that, but savings absolutely will help. And when school is on vacation, the volunteers are on vacation. So obviously you're full-time teachers, but when class is not in session, then the volunteers are on vacation. Mike, how did you do with your budget in Micronesia?
So as I mentioned before, I was in a little bit of a unique situation because the main town on Pohnpei was pretty developed, and there was restaurants and there were bars where you could go to get a beer. But where I personally lived was about an hour away from that by taxi, so I had a very easy time managing my stipend. The important thing to remember, for me at least, is that yes, I did have to pay for my electricity and water, but that was split between me and my roommate. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was probably $20 for electricity, but total. So it's not quite as much as it may seem at first. Mm-hmm. But so for me personally, it was when I was at my house, I didn't have many things to spend money on. I would not have places where I could go to spend a lot of money. But when I went into town, there were opportunities. And so I know some of the volunteers who lived in the main town, their stipends didn't go quite as far. But for me personally, pretty much every month, it worked out. And I think my experience just was it's about priorities. You could go to the fish market and buy yellowfin tuna for $1 a pound, which was incredibly cheap, or you could go to the grocery store and buy a jar of peanut butter for $10 a jar. So it was kind of about what you prioritized and how you adjusted to that.
Awesome. Great. Okay, thank you guys all for shedding some light on that. We're going to go forward. Safety, super important. Okay, as I mentioned, we review this information during orientation. So, and also I think some of our panelists have mentioned that you're checking in with your field director every week. That could be literally over the radio, it could be an email, a text message, in person, etc. So our volunteers in Micronesia and Marshall Islands will be required to have that we will be providing them with life jackets and GPS beacons, which need to be on their person when they're traveling by boat. And of course, you're going to be receiving this boat and water safety instruction during orientation. So you'll, I think, get the gist of how important it is. And obviously, we're in the Pacific, right? So natural disasters do happen. Just this past weekend, actually, there was a tsunami warning in Micronesia, specifically in Chuuk, from an earthquake that had struck off the coast of Papua New Guinea. So everything is fine, thank God. Some of the schools will actually reopen tomorrow, and our volunteers will be there, and they'll be part of the cleanup, and they'll be part of the entire kind of chaos, right? But it hopefully becomes beautiful chaos because the community comes together to help out. These storms don't happen frequently, but it's obviously a possibility in all of these countries. So for that reason, we're tracking storm alerts through numerous systems. We work with the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. Like, it's no joke. And that's why processes like our emergency protocol are extremely important to be able to maintain communication between all of the volunteers and the field director, and of course also to report that information back home. And that is just one more reason why we have health and evacuation insurance. Also on this list, you'll see things like health, illness, diet, traveling after dark, which, as we kind of mentioned, theft. I think we can all relate to that in every part of the world. Don't bring anything you just can't afford to lose. And a computer lock does go a very, very long way. So Melinda, I wanted to get your opinion, just kind of experiences or just general perception of safety and theft in American Samoa.
I felt very safe in Samoa. There was never really an instance where I thought that I was unsafe, or I felt that I was unsafe. Samoa is, I mean, I was on the main island, and there are more people than you would expect, I guess, but I knew a lot of the people in my community around the school and around where I lived, and then other areas. So I knew a lot of people, and I never felt that I was ever in danger in any way. I know in the past there might have been like one theft with a teacher in a school, where maybe they lost maybe an iPod or something like that, but I and the volunteers that I was with never experienced any of that. And I had computers in my classroom, luckily, and my students always took care of the equipment.
That's great. And that's lucky, to be honest, because petty theft is definitely something that all of our programs or all of our volunteers face, and I personally faced it. But again, that's just a worldwide issue, but it happens, so we just like to bring it up. Ben, I wanted to get your insight on health and diet, because specifically in the Marshalls, I think that's something that affects our volunteers the most, as to, maintaining their health and somehow getting a nutritious diet. On that note, I would love to hear what your normal daily diet was, what you were usually eating, and how you dealt with staying, keeping your mental and physical health out there.
Yeah, so I guess, excuse me, for a daily diet, every morning I would have either pancakes or donuts with peanut butter on them, which sounds delicious, but after a year of having that, it gets kind of old. And then for lunch and dinner, it was always white rice with a lot of canned meat, so like canned tuna, Spam, canned mackerel. So that was about half the time, and the other half of the time was rice with some type of like fresh fish, like fresh seafood or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. So you got a little bit of protein in there and a lot of sugar, so that's good.
Yeah.
The next slide, I'm actually going to address how that is the reality in a lot of these countries, the limited variety of food. So thank you very much for touching on that. But did any volunteers that you were with, or even Matt, you can jump in on this, how you guys dealt with like just illnesses on the island, like whether it was from water or food or from obviously the heat and things like that?
Yeah, you definitely have to, take into account of where you are and that you have limited resources that if you do get sick, so your health is definitely very important. There was a small, I guess, hospital or a doctor on island who actually wasn't there all of the time, but if you had something wrong, you can go to him and get something if you had like a stomach ache or amoebas or something like that from drinking bad water. So just taking care of your body, being conscious of what you're eating, where you're getting your water from and stuff like that. So, but I was fortunate enough not to have anything too serious happen to me. But yeah, just monitoring your cuts and stuff like that. So any like small thing that happens to you can turn into a major thing pretty quickly. So just taking care of that.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. That's pretty.
Brooke, can I add something else?
Please go for it.
Sorry. I also wanted to just say a little bit about the safety. Is that my roommate and I, as much as I'm shy, we really put ourselves out there and into the community, and so much so that the rest of the island pretty much knew who we were, to the point where people that I didn't know and hadn't met knew my name and knew which school I taught at. And they probably have like a cousin or a niece or a nephew that had me as a teacher or just had me at their school. So it really goes a long way to just go out into the community and put yourself out there, because you'll be surprised how the entire island could potentially just take care of you.
Mm-hmm. That's great, and I'm glad you noted that, because that can also be, I think, and I'm sure it was for you, perhaps a little scary at the beginning. Like you had all of a sudden you had a lot of attention from people that didn't know you, and you were being recognized and literally watched everywhere. And that is what happens with our volunteers, because you are an outsider, and you cannot underestimate how much you'll stand out. It doesn't matter what you look like, but the moment you open your mouth, that's when people know that you're not from there. So that responsibility is huge. It can help you beyond immeasurable levels, but it can also be very difficult to deal with at the beginning. Okay, we have 2 more slides, so we'll literally be done in 5 minutes. This has been fantastic. We just have a couple more questions for you guys. Actually, so here we are discussing cultural and a couple more physical challenges, but we're going to focus on the cultural. So corporal punishment, for those that have heard of it, and for those that have not heard of it. So it's a culturally acceptable method of child discipline, but using physical means in the classroom and in the home. And when I say culturally acceptable, I mean in these countries where we're discussing, American Samoa, Marshall Islands, and Micronesia. And so therefore, this is, I'd say, probably the biggest challenge that most of our volunteers have faced or heard of or seen or whatnot. So obviously our WorldTeach policy is that our volunteers do not partake in that. You never hit a child, but it is going to be something that passes through your life there. So Matt, as you were a field director overseeing lots of volunteers, and also you were a volunteer yourself, I wanted to get your insight on this as to, if you ever came across it or how people dealt with it and how they processed it.
It definitely was one of the harder things for myself and the volunteers to deal with. I saw it both in the Marshall Islands and in Chuuk. And you also see it in the treatment of animals. So in Chuuk, they do eat dog, and they treat what we would consider domestic animals not very nicely. In terms of corporal punishment, it's really difficult. Talking to each other is a really big thing, because I found some volunteers would bottle it up and wouldn't talk about it for a long time, and it was really concerning them, especially when some of the teachers would make the students a weekly journal entry, and some of those entries were difficult to read because it involved some of that kind of stuff. There's not much you can do about it. It's one of the things you kind of just have to do with the best way you can, and talking to your family and friends is a good way to do that.
Yeah, I think that really sums it up. We're not there to change anything. We're just there to teach certain academic subjects. We're not there to to judge anybody's culture. So it's all about processing it and dealing it and understanding that it's in a certain context there and leaving it there. Great,
Yeah.
thank you. On another note, equally important, perhaps a little bit lighter, gender roles. So clearly the gentleman mentioned that they were not allowed to do their own laundry because they were men. That's definitely going to happen in some of these places where the woman fills a very specific role. Melinda, because you are the lady on the line with us tonight, did you get any sense of this? Again, every country is very different, but how did you see those gender roles specifically in American Samoa?
I definitely felt it. But American Samoa, there's kind of like a hierarchy of how people are treated. A pastor or a preacher, someone from the church, is definitely going to be one of the most important people in the culture or around the island or anywhere. Directly under that is typically a teacher. So you'll find that most of the students are showing you respect, and the families as well, and they kind of take your word as kind of like law. They'll definitely have more respect for male teachers, but for the most part, I didn't have to worry as much in terms of gender roles just because I was a teacher, and American Samoans were very receptive of WorldTeach and all of us that went as volunteers, and so they treated us very kindly. And so I didn't really have any issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. That's good. Again, everyone, of course, has their own individual experiences, so I'm glad that you had a good one. All right, one more question. Mike, I wanted to get your opinion, and this is, I think, a good question to end on. Obviously, we're working in communities and countries where they are valuing education differently than us. That could be seen in the administrators, in the teachers, in the parents, and in the children. Obviously, it's probably something different than where you grew up and how you yourself independently value education. So is that something that you saw, that you dealt with, that you struggled with, seeing how other people perhaps maybe didn't follow through with certain responsibilities in the school, again, even on like the side of administrators and teachers?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me about that, because that was definitely something that I really saw a lot of and struggled with, and was something that I had to deal with fairly consistently. I guess for me it was, you view a teacher as someone whose professional job it is to be there and be reliable for their students. And so when other teachers or the administrators, wouldn't come to class or wouldn't follow through on their responsibilities, it was frustrating to see. But it kind of, it fits into that category of things where you do what you can, you commit yourself to be the best teacher that you can, and you step up in ways that you feel comfortable with, but you're not going to change the cultural system and the cultural appreciation for education. It definitely is something that is a huge transition, having, a teacher not show up to work because he was tired that day. That's frustrating. And you'll see your students wandering through the school not having that teacher there, and it's not easy to accept, and it's your choice as to how you can fill that gap, or what you feel comfortable in doing while you're there. And so for me personally, it was trying to do tutoring before or after school, setting up different programs that I already mentioned a little bit, and it's just you doing what you can to show that in other places education is important, and that like where you come from, you can share that that point of view that like where you come from, education is really valuable, and that you're always going to be on time. You're not going to take days off and things like that. So kind of be a role model, even if it doesn't always feel like it's having the strongest impact.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Can I add something to that, Brooke?
Yes, of course.
If you finish, Noel. Also, in terms of value of education, it'll be a big shock to a lot of the volunteers going out there that when there's a funeral, you can easily take a week off school, and the funeral might only be one day, but have to wait for family members to come in from other islands or other locations, and that can be a really frustrating thing for a teacher.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I'd never even heard of that. That's amazing. I'm glad you shared that with us. Yeah, and again, it's not our place to judge or even to understand. It's just our opportunity to experience it, to be part of it, to learn from it, to teach, and that's it, really. Cool. Anything else to add on that? Anybody?
I had one thing to add real quick. That's all right.
Please, go ahead.
Definitely, like what was said, it can be like really frustrating when you have these expectations from like coming from a place where teachers are showing up on time and stuff like that, and coming to a place where it's a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
And a hard thing for me was to also not fall into that role. And so like there's days when I was like the only teacher who was at school because there was someone who was sick or someone who was didn't feel like just different things, where I was the only person teaching that day. And for me, it was kind of one of those things like, man, I could also just go home today and like not have school and it'd be totally fine. So it's a little bit hard to know, like, you could just not show up and it wouldn't have like any consequences. So it takes a lot to like have that drive. It's like, no, like I'm here to teach. I'm here to have a big impact on these students and myself. So definitely a big challenge there too.
Absolutely. I think I've heard people say that you have to be an island of excellence. You have to expect that for yourself and for nobody else, and just follow your own expectations, or set your own expectations for yourself. Cool. Okay, so Caitlin, our admissions coordinator, is on the line to quickly tell us about the actual application process. Our process is, and then we're going to let you free to go start your applications or to finish your applications to join us. Caitlin, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've already spoken with a few of the people who are on the line. We've done our interviews. They're also corresponded via email, and some of you haven't started your applications, which is great. We can walk you through the process. So as you can see there, the requirements: native or native level English speaker, any nationality. You need to have a bachelor's degree, again, any academic focus or major. A few people asked us in the questions, there's no teaching certification or experience necessary, but we want to see that commitment to service, that commitment to education, and most of all, the ability to adapt to a foreign culture. Very, very important. And for the Pacific programs, no local language fluency required. So the application process consists of a resume, a personal statement, and what's actually not listed here is also your academic transcript. So you will need to submit those 3 items. And then you pass on to the second stage, which is an interview with yours truly, and also 2 letters of recommendation that you would have submitted on your behalf. So the program dates and deadlines are all a little different. So basically, if you have any questions about each of the programs, you should feel free to email us. You can email us at info@worldteach.org or admissions@worldteach.org if you're still not really sure about which program is best for you. But we are open until May 1st for the Marshall Islands and Micronesia, and until June 16th for American Samoa. But I would absolutely say that if you are really interested in, getting a spot in these programs, that you should complete your application as soon as possible, and that way you have the best chance. It's definitely, these programs are competitive, especially since they're funded. So feel free to reach out with any questions in the meantime. We're here to help.
Beautiful. Caitlin, thank you so much, and that's my fault that those items weren't listed. I forgot those. My apologies. All right, it is a little bit past the hour, so my apologies for keeping you guys late. If anybody has any questions, holler, text them in. I think we've answered a lot of stuff. If people have questions on like how to defer their student loans, we can talk to you about that. Or traveling with like friends or couples, that's an option. So if anybody wants to speak with the panelists that were on the line tonight, we can get you in touch with them, like via email, and other alums as well. We are very eager to share our experiences. We've got literally alums all over the world, all different ages, all different backgrounds, people who had taught before, people who will probably never teach again, all of that. So we're just very grateful to have you guys. So here we are. If you have any questions, reach out. Otherwise, thank you so much to our panelists. And I'm going to give you 1 second to, if anybody has any questions, I'm looking in the chat box. I think we're okay. All right. Again, thanks to the panelists. We hope to see you guys in the Pacific this summer, next summer, for a year, for a lifetime, who knows. And best of luck to everybody. So thank you so much. Have a good night.